My name is Lenja Sliegendrecht and I work as program maker for Studium Generale of Erasmus University. We all have sexual fantasies. Still, they are not always something we are open about, not even with the people we trust the most. Why is this? What is the role of fantasies in sex? And can porn help us in actually opening up about the fantasies we have? Dr. Marieke Dewitte is assistant professor at the Experimental Health Psychology section of Maastricht University. As a sexologist, she conducts psychophysiological research on sexual functioning and gender differences. She explores relational dynamics and attachment in relation to sexual responding. So, is porn detrimental to relationships, or can they actually benefit from it? This podcast is a registration of a lecture that was part of a live event called Let's Talk About Sex at Erasmus University. Do you want to join our programs live? Check out our website or socials for the full calendar. Enjoy the lecture!
Thank you for inviting me and for introducing me. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective, make it a little bit broader. I'm going to talk about porn and fantasies, but mainly also about pleasure and relationships. Because the central question of this talk is how can pornography contribute to sexual pleasure in partner relationships? And then I want to highlight some of the concepts. Pornography in relation to sexual pleasure in the context of relationships. So let's first start with sexual pleasure, so that we are sure we're all talking about the same thing and you understand what are the preconditions of sexual pleasure. Let's start, why do people have sex? Research has shown that there are 237 reasons to have sex. And if you would just ask people on the street, why is sex and why do people have sex? We often think about this reproductive role, the biological function of sex. We have sex because we need to reproduce. But if you then think that people have about 2 children, you need about 30 times of penetration sex to get pregnant, then we know reproduction should not be the main reason why people have sex. What is the main reason? It's pleasure. We have sex because we like it. Mother Nature made sure that sex is pleasurable because as human beings, we only want to repeat what we like. If we don't like it, if there's no pleasure, we don't do it anymore. So it's actually important also for reproduction, if we want to focus on that sex is pleasurable. So it's so interesting to see that pleasure is the main drive of sex, but it has been ignored for a long time. If we look at research, science has studied sex from a biological point of view. Sex is reproduction. Male gaze, because we mainly had male researchers. I'm still a little bit biased because today I was in Utrecht and we were talking about female empowerment and how we can bring more attention to women in science, so I'm completely in my feminist stance now. But there are a lot of men in science and they were looking at male genitalia and the penis and erection and ejaculation because that is what you need to reproduce. We don't talk about pleasure because it's not necessary. And female pleasure, female genitals, well, why would we study that? It has no direct role for reproduction. Yes, the vagina and the uterus, that has been studied because that has a role in reproduction. But if we think about pleasure, we shouldn't focus on the vagina or the uterus because the vagina is a birth channel, has nothing to do with pleasure, much less sensitive than what really is the pleasure and the lust organ in women. It's the clitoris. In men, the penis implies reproduction and pleasure, but in women, the pleasure is the clitoris and reproduction is the vagina. So it's not penis and vagina, it's penis and clitoris. But it took until 1998, until the first, there were female researchers who actually thought, let's look at the female genitalia, let's look at the clitoris. Before that time, we just thought that the clitoris was this little knot on the outside. And then we discovered, it's a big clitoral complex. It's a big organ, about 10 centimeters, that is located deep into the vagina. And it has the same parts as a penis. It has the glands, the corpus cavernosum, the foreskin. It's exactly the same. Women have on the inside what men have on the outside. And that makes sense because in the womb, we start from a female dimorphic ground plan. It's kind of a small clitoris that grows into a penis. We often say that the clitoris is a small penis, but it's the penis that is a big clitoris. And so you see that they actually look the same and they function the same. Because what happens? What do you need? You need for male sexual pleasure to stimulate the penis that gets into erection. Well, we have the same in women. You stimulate the clitoris, and the clitoral complex will get into erection. And this is important because when it's in erection, there's more blood flow to that area, which creates pressure in the blood vessels, which means that blood plasma will be pushed out, and that's vaginal lubrication. And what do we need to experience penetration sex as pleasurable? A wet vagina. What do you need to have a wet vagina? You need to make sure you stimulate the clitoris. That's often the big problem. That's why a lot of women don't experience pleasure, because we skip the clitoral stimulation. Now, what is sexual pleasure? It's not the same as desire. It's not satisfaction. It's not orgasm. Because you can have pleasurable sex without orgasm. Orgasm is fun, but it's not necessary. And if we think about desire, desire is actually the memory of pleasure. Because what are the preconditions for sexual pleasure? There needs to be a stimulus. Something that is sexually interesting. A thought, a fantasy, a visual. We often are not aware of all these sexual stimuli that are around in our society. We pick that up. Our brain automatically picks up these sexual stimuli. We are not always consciously processing them, but they're there. And they will lower the threshold with which your sexual system gets activated. Now, our brain automatically picks it up, which triggers genital arousal, erection in men and in women. Now, important, genital arousal says nothing about desire, consent, or pleasure. This is just your brain saying there's something sexual, whether you like it or not. It's the moment you become aware of these genital arousal responses and you assign a positive meaning to it, you expect something rewarding, something pleasurable, which results in a subjective sense of arousal and the desire to actually do something with it. So important, we have body and mind. Our genital arousal and subjective arousal, they feed back into each other, they make each other stronger. So beginning arousal, subjective arousal will feed back, you get more horny, you get more turned down. But what is really crucial here is the aspect of pleasure, the expectation of pleasure, the expectation of reward. If you don't expect sex to be rewarding, you won't desire it. We don't want what we don't like. So basic. So desire is the memory of pleasure. Desire results from the anticipation of pleasure. So the best cure for low desire is making sex more pleasurable. So if we then think, okay, pleasure depends on good sexual stimulation, rewarding sexual stimulation, something that works for you. It's also about variation, because what we do know is that when you repeatedly show sexual stimuli to people, they get habituated. We call that the habituation effect. After 5-6 times the same stimulus, arousal goes down, and then you have Coolidge effect, which means you bring a new stimulus and arousal goes up again. That's the exact reason why porn has been invented, to satisfy this need on sexual variation. Because if you're in a relationship having sex the same time with the same bodies and the same, you kind of need some sexual variation, and porn is kind of a way also to deal with that. We can stimulate in different modalities, because porn is very obvious, like visual stimuli that triggers your sexual system, and we know that in general men are more inclined towards these visual stimuli. But there's also cognitive stimulation. Fantasies is also a way, this is also a stimulus that activates your sexual system. You can intentionally or spontaneously fantasize about sex. If we think about cognitive and fantasies, you can also think about erotic podcasts, erotic stories, because what we see in an erotic story or an erotic podcast, that you do have a script, you have a context, you have a story, but you can fantasize your characters. How do they look like? In what setting? How does it feel? And what we see in general also, that these podcasts are very popular now in women, because women are often more inclined towards fantasizing cognitive, while men like more the visual stimuli. But I'm always a little bit conscious about, gender differences, and men want this and women want that, because then we get this idea of men come from Mars and women from Venus, and women want to cuddle and fantasize, and men want to sex and climax. No, I mean, we're both from planet Earth, and also women want sex and orgasm and watch porn, and also men like erotic podcasts, so don't make it too general. These are our averages and tendencies. So fantasies are important and are an important source of stimulation. And if we think about fantasies, what are common fantasies, and it has been discussed, and Samira's doing great research in kind of categorizing all these fantasies, like taboo sex acts, multi-partner sex, passion, romance, BDSM, novelty, being in non-monogamous relationships. These are fantasies that are often reported in research. Now, if you think about that, you can see also that there's kind of this gray zone because, like Samira is saying, like our fantasies and porn and everything is also shaped by stereotypes and societal views. And it's really interesting to see you have like vanilla sex and paraphilia. What is vanilla sex is kind of the common safe sex, safe sex not in terms of safe condom sex, but like, you know, not very exciting or not very novel or adventurous. And then you have paraphilia, on the other hand, which is more about sexual preferences that deviate from the norm. But what is then the norm? The norm is then the statistical average. But if you then see that nowadays people are fantasizing a lot about BDSM, like if you see the 50 Shades of Grey, Grey has really kind of inclined people to fantasize more, to include like bondage, some things in their sex. And so you could say like kinky sex has become a little bit more vanilla sex now. So what is then paraphilia? It's really interesting to see how our sex content also and fantasies are shaped by societal changes. Now, a common myth is that fantasies would reveal this underlying deep desire, which has also been discussed here in the panel discussion here. Like, yeah, but it's not. It's not necessarily an underlying deep desire. You could say that fantasies are the vibrator of our mind. It's just a stimulation. It's a story you create, and you're the director of your own story. You can fantasize about everything you want. Only research has shown that about one third of the people actually want to do something with the sexual fantasies. The majority of people just want to fantasize, do not necessarily want to act on it. So if you fantasize about BDSM, does it mean that you want BDSM in your sexual script? Maybe, but not necessarily. What we see in BDSM is sometimes that, for example, women fantasize a lot about submissiveness, and then kind of it can sort of be very difficult because I'm a feminist and I want a sort of power, and now I'm kind of fantasizing about submission. It's sometimes because you're very much in control and need to handle everything, and a fantasy is then more about submission, because letting go of control, like I don't want to be the leader in everything, I just want to undergo things. That's kind of the underlying theme in the fantasy, not necessarily the BDSM. So it's not necessarily this underlying deep desire. Watching porn fantasies might be seen as something missing in your relationship. It's cheating if you watch porn, if you fantasize, because what we also know from research is that a lot of women fantasize about having sex with somebody else than your partner. You could say, okay, it's a fantasy, but a lot of women will fantasize about having sex with somebody else while they're having sex with their partner. And then you could say, oh, but that's cheating, or there's something missing, you're not enjoying sex. No, it's a stimulus. You create a story that helps you to get aroused. It's not because you're not aroused enough by your partner. It can be very different meanings, like what we know, for example, also during sex, and especially women have the tendency to please the other, to focus on the other, like, is he or she still enjoying it? Is it okay? And they prioritize the pleasure of the other above their own pleasure. And fantasizing can be ways to stay in your own mind, to keep the focus on your own arousal. It's just a trick, something that helps you to get into the sexual arousal. So it's not necessarily signaling that something is wrong. And that's very important. That's why we need to kind of demystify fantasies, porn and everything, and just see how it can have a place in your relationship. Because if we see this, a lot of these myths about porn and fantasies are somehow related to the relationship. So what about porn, sexual pleasure in relationships? First of all, I think very important, pleasure is the measure. Sexual relationships are not about keeping the spark alive, or about how often do you have sex, how exciting is sex, how much sex toys do you use. It's about how often do you have pleasurable sex. That's what is important. It's also shared sexual pleasure. In a lot of relationships, one partner has pleasure, the other has no pleasure. It should be shared sexual pleasure, but shared sexual pleasure does not mean wanting the same at the same time. They're two individuals, people with different desires, different fantasies, different needs. It's unrealistic to expect that you both want the same at the same time. There are very often discrepancies in sexual desire. If you have a busy period at work, sex is not on top of your mind. So there's a discrepancy. That should not be a problem. There are often differences in what, how often, and when people want to have sex. It's really important about accepting that and making sure that one partner is here, the other partner is here, and what we often expect then is that we bring this partner to this level. That's the benchmark, this is the one with the problem. No, it's meeting each other halfway. Your desire is too high, yours is too low. How can we compromise? And in that sense, porn can be a good therapeutic tool, which I'm going to address. So in general, what we know is that sexual desire tends to decline in long-term relationships. So somehow, when you're in a long-term relationship, you will face a period in which there are discrepancies in sexual desire because we don't decline all at the same rate, in the same pace. First of all, the partner is always available. There's a lack of differentiation. The beginning of the relationship, you can desire each other, you're dating, you're planning in your mind, fantasizing about having sex. Myth of spontaneous sex debunked because it's not spontaneous. You know you're going to date your partner, you know you're going to have sex, so you're planning it. Lack of differentiation. In a lot of relationships, people are all about we and us. It should be me and you. And that's why also fantasies, watching porn, masturbation is okay. It's your part, it's your time, me time. You don't necessarily always need to have sex together with your partner. You can fantasize about your own private sexual world. You can watch porn on your own because you like it, and you can just masturbate in addition to partner sex. The one is not replacing the other. It can just be exist next to each other and in addition to each other. In the relationships, often less romance, less seduction, routine, in the sense in the beginning of the relationship, you do the efforts to kind of make sure you have nice lingerie or some other, or showering, and at a certain point you stop doing that. And that's kind of routine. In the beginning, you're kind of discovering each other, and at a certain point, you know where the buttons are, and then you say, oh, when I do this, he or she gets turned on, and it's like we press the button and the sexual system is on, which is very efficient, but in a way also less exciting. Less self-care, priorities on family work, so less me time, sex is not a priority. So there are a lot of reasons why sexual desire tends to decline in relationships. There are a lot of instances, periods in your relationship in which there will be a discrepancy. Very important is try to balance this. Reframe low sexual desire as a couple problem. It's normal in long-term relationships. Develop realistic expectations about sex, the good enough sex model. Sex does not need to be wow and fantastic and passion, and that's also one of the risks of watching porn, is that it seems wow and creative and all doing these interesting things like our sex is so boring, and then you kind of, maybe get lost in that fantasy of porn. So it's also important to tell people, sex can be great and you need to invest in it and make it a priority, and sometimes it will be passionate and sometimes sex will be just okay. And that's okay. That's good enough. Broaden your sexual script, because you can just accept, oh, well, it's normal that our sexual desire declines and it's normal that there are discrepancies in sexual desire, but if you really want to change that, you will have to work on it. You will have to talk to each other, discover, what do you like, what do I like, and broaden your sexual script, compromise. And in that sense, porn can be interesting because when you're here and you're here, then you can say, well, meet in the middle, but what do you do with this high desire? Well, watching porn and masturbating is not a bad option. Fantasize. Do something with the need for sexual stimulation. Don't put that pressure on your partner. So tips for more pleasure is, first of all, you need to explore, what do I need to get sexually aroused? It's about discovery and fantasies, erotic podcasts, sexual stories, porn can all be sources of inspiration to understand what do I need to feel sexual pleasure. Creating a context to actually an opportunity, date night, creating some intimacy to actually make sure that there is sexual stimulation so you can actually start to engage in sexuality. And communication. If you know what you want, tell your partner what you want. There are no good or bad lovers. You cannot say, my partner is not really good at oral sex. It's what do you need during oral sex, and tell your partner. Communication. And in that sense, stimulus context communication, that is what sexual pleasure is about. And in that sense, also porn, again, can work as a therapeutic tool. We often, as therapists, actually prescribe this to couples. Watch porn together. It can create stimulation, a source of inspiration, getting aroused, but it's also about communication. It's not necessarily, we don't not necessarily ask couples to watch porn because we want them to get horny by watching porn. It's more about eliciting and starting the conversation. Hey, what do you think about this? Does it turn you on? Oh no, not for me, that's really a killer. Oh, for me it's a trigger. Oh, why? And you start understanding each other. What do you like? What do you don't like? Because otherwise, if we say, communicate with your partner about sex, okay, now we're sitting on the couch and let's start talk about our sexual fantasies and our sexual life and what do we like and what do we don't like. It's kind of confronting this direct communication. So then, watching porn can be a good icebreaker to actually have the conversation about sex. Now, there are two sides to every story. Obviously, we know from the research that there are some risks involved in sexual development, but also in relationships. You could say miseducation about sex, because young people don't know what sex is, see porn, and then it's like, okay, this is what we need to do, so they start to imitate sexual behavior. It might endorse rape myths, objectifying women as sexual objects, more positive attitudes regarding casual sex and infidelity, which might lead to more breakup and divorce. Some studies have shown that. Sexual problems, because at a certain point men want more and more. We see that especially in men, and that there's kind of this desensitization idea that the sexual stimulation needs to be more and more extreme to get aroused, and then the real sex is kind of not satisfying enough anymore, and that could create sexual problems, unrealistic expectations, sexual ideals, which could interfere with sexual satisfaction. But there are benefits, and I think this is also so important. If we talk about porn, we often automatically assume the negative things. If you think about the hypothesis in research, the hypothesis is often what is the negative impact of porn on sexual development, sexual behavior, sexual relationships. But you could also say, why don't we assume a positive impact? Because porn might also have positive effects, like more accurate knowledge about sexual anatomy and function. Sex education is not inclusive and diverse, so a lot of people who do not identify with being heterosexual and monogamous and white people, what we often see in sex education at school, is kind of, search for information on the internet and see, okay, I don't identify with what I hear at my biology lessons, so what is now sex about? If you're queer, if you're in LGBTQI groups. So that could sort of be a good source of inspiration. Like I said, as a therapeutic tool, give you variation in sexual script, learn what you like and what you don't like, and learn to communicate, and dealing with discrepancies in sexual desire. So there are also benefits to porn. And that's also why it's so important to make sure that we look at both sides of the story. Now, porn in relationships, you can see it as compensatory or complementary, which means it kind of replaces partner sex, or it can be complementary in addition to another way of experiencing sexual pleasure. There's research showing that people who watch porn would report less satisfaction, less commitment, less communication with their partner, more aggression, more divorce, and that would be stronger in men than in women. But there's also research showing that there's more desire and more satisfaction when people watch porn. How can we understand this? Why are these mixed findings there? I think there an important point is also asking individuals or asking couples. Because if you do dyadic analysis and you ask both partners, to report on porn, then it becomes more interesting to see these mixed findings, to understand them, because what we often see, if there are negative impact on relationships, it's not about people watching porn, but about discrepancies in porn use. One partner is using porn and the other is not. And it seems that the discrepancies is more predictive of lower relationship satisfaction than the fact that people are watching porn or not. So dyadic and not individual data. Not knowing about the porn use of your partner, that's also something that has a negative impact on relationship variables. Watching alone versus watching together. It's also interesting. Do you watch porn on your own? Do you do it together with your partner? It can have different functions in your relationships and a different impact on your relationship satisfaction. Do you accept the porn use of your partner? Because there are a lot of attitudes, beliefs, emotions about porn use, and that will also have an impact on whether or not watching porn has a positive or negative impact. So I think this is really important. If we study the impact of porn on relationships, ask both partners and see the dynamics between partners, because these are more predictive than asking individuals about their porn use. Now, to end, I want to make a link to research in general and the bias in research, in the sense that our current research is very much focused on young people, heteronormativity, monogamous relationships, weird populations, which means Western, educated, industrialized, rich and democratic people, and that's kind of our bias, cisgender and not transgender. So there are still a lot of biases also when we look at the impact of porn and how it's implicated and what the function is in relationships. We know that culture and all these different factors can have an impact, so we need to take that into account. There's also a big bias in research that a lot of research is studying individuals. And if you think about this traditional sex research, is done in individuals, which means, and I'm just going to show you this is an individual lab setting. If we want to make conclusions on sexual arousal, what do? We place individuals in the lab, we make them watch porn, we have instruments to measure their genital arousal, so it's kind of a tampon-like device in women that they have to insert into the vagina, which we can measure vaginal blood flow, and then there's kind of an elastic that men place around their penis so we can measure erection. And then they also have to indicate how sexually aroused they feel. But there's a big bias because you use porn here to elicit sexual arousal in individuals. And we make conclusions about sexual arousal. But this is more closely related to masturbation behavior and individual solitary sex. And we know that sexual problems often occur in the context of relationships. A lot of people don't have issues with arousal or orgasm when they masturbate, but they have issues when they have sex with their partner. So if we really want to understand sexual arousal, and especially when it goes wrong, we need to include both partners in the lab, see what happens. And we did some research. We thought, okay, let's bring both partners together, let them watch porn, and we see what happens in their body and in their mind. At that point, we saw it wasn't really working in the sense that sexual arousal was actually lower when the partner was present, and we expected, because especially women are very sensitive to relational factors and context factors, we thought sexual arousal will be higher when the partner is present because they're more emotionally engaged in the situation, but it was not, it was the opposite. And then we thought, yeah, it might make sense. You're sitting together, watching porn, might be a little bit awkward if you don't have experience with it. We also asked them to rate the sexual arousal of their partner, so then you feel very much watched by your partner, am I aroused or not? So it didn't really work out. And then we were thinking like, but why do we elicit sexual arousal by means of porn? Why do people have to watch porn? Why don't we just let them stimulate each other like they would do at home and measure their sexual arousal? And that's what we do in Maastricht. So first of all, we created a little bit of context, a sex lab. If you know, the lab rooms in a university building are often white rooms, a lot of wires, very clinical. So we thought, let's make it a little bit cozy because context matters. We get rid of the porn and people are actually stimulating each other, and meanwhile we're measuring their genital arousal, their subjective arousal, and see what happens and how they map their sexual arousal. We also have developed mobile measures so that we can actually also go at home in the bedroom and measure what happens when people have sex. And what we want to do is, especially what we call sexual synchrony, is kind of understanding how is sexual arousal functioning in relationships. Do partners tune their sexual arousal? Because you would assume that when you have sex, you have to pace a bit, like, oh, she's not there yet, he's not there yet, let's pace a little bit, let's get into the same level of sexual arousal. Can we see that? Can we see these signals? And what is happening, like if there's a rise in sexual arousal in one partner, does the other partner follow, and who takes the lead? And you could say it doesn't matter, but in terms of sexual problems, it matters. Because if you have lower arousal, do you drag the other one down, or can the one with high arousal lift you up? What happens? What is the dynamic in couples? We don't know at this point because it has not been studied before. So do partners tune? Does it matter? Do you need to be at the same level of sexual arousal? Is your sex better? Do you have more sexual pleasure when you're synchronizing in terms of sex? We don't know. Is it functional in every phase of the sexual response cycle? Because you could say during arousal it's important to turn each other on, but maybe during orgasm, it's actually very important to focus on yourself and let go of your partner, because you need to own your own sexual pleasure. So then maybe synchronizing and tuning in with your partner is not a good thing. We don't know yet. Let's study that. Does it change over the course of a relationship? Also a very interesting question. Sometimes when you talk with people, they say, we just match. We're sexually compatible. We had this click right from the start of our relationship. Is that synchrony? Or is it something that develops over the course of relationships and people kind of adapt to each other throughout the relationship? Or can it already be there from the beginning? Does it play a role in partner selection? How does it operate in the context of sexual distress, especially because we see that sexual problems in one partner often go along with sexual problems in the other partner, so we want to understand what is happening there. So you would say we know already a lot about sex, but at the same time, we don't know a lot about sex, and especially when it comes to sex in relationships. And there are a lot of labs in which you cannot do this type of research. Let's think about the States, USA. It's impossible to do this type of research. But in the Netherlands, we can, because we have this very open policy, progressive policy. So this is really interesting research to actually see what is happening body-mind while partners have sex. So if you have questions about that or want to participate in our research, please do email me. We do give you money to have sex in the lab, so that's a good thing. Have sex for science. You can also get reimbursed for the travel expenses. So even if you come from Rotterdam all the way to Maastricht, you can get your train ticket reimbursed and then kind of have an exciting afternoon in our sex lab. Thank you if you have questions, but that's clearly part of the rest of the evening. Thank you.
That was the lecture. Interested in more? Check out our Instagram or website through SG Erasmus for our upcoming events, or as you did just now, listen or watch to one of our previous events on YouTube or Spotify.